So let's start by setting our motivation. So we think that the purpose of the course is to try to understand more and more deeply the teachings of the Buddha, the specific insights that liberate an ordinary sentient being from suffering. So we cultivate the mind that sees the Buddha as a reliable, unmistaken guide, and his teachings as reliable, dependable, repeatable methods, wisdom that do have the power to liberate us from suffering. And we think that we want that end goal primarily to gain the ability to work perfectly for all other sentient beings. So we try to cultivate these minds of refuge and bodhicitta. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another class. Does anyone want to start with a question from last week or something that they've been thinking about? Nope. So we'll start then today on day 39. Which is still on this broader topic of training the mind in confidence, in being able to see the Guru as Buddha. So this is just further elucidating what we've started talking about on this topic. The quote is, "Everything depends on how we as disciples train our mind." So this is getting at the further discussion of the quote. It tells the story of two disciples who had the same teacher and who had the same experience of traveling for a long time, being exhausted, meeting their teacher at the end of this journey, and their teacher presenting them with cold tea. This is Tibet, probably, or it could be India, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. So probably iced tea probably wasn't a thing. I don't think they had like pitchers with, but probably hot tea was the standard. And this was perhaps lukewarm tea. If it was Tibet, then Tibet is quite cold, so maybe it was relatively, the room temperature might have been quite cold. So, but the custom, the purpose of the story is to say that the custom is that people drank hot tea, and this was not hot tea. And one of the disciples was upset that this custom had been broken by their teacher, that they had received not hot tea. The other disciple thought that they had just traveled a long distance. They, were sweaty, and that their teacher had foresaw that they would be hot and sweaty, and that cold tea would be refreshing and beneficial. So two people presented with the same experience. The teacher didn't say, "Oh, hey, I made this tea because I thought you would do it." It didn't explain. He just said, "Here's the tea." So it was really up to their own minds to decide how to interpret that situation. And they interpreted it differently. One disciple got upset and criticized their teacher, thought that they were being rude. The other one thought how kind that they, changed the situation to fit what their needs were, and how amazing it was that they were so thoughtful. And so one of them was practicing guru devotion, the other was not. The other was criticizing their teacher and holding, getting, in a way, getting angry, angry in the, general sense, at least getting frustrated, hopefully not wanting to cause harm, but, some. So, and this is getting at a broader, we've talked in in all of the classes, I think, this theme comes up, this idea. Gendon often talks about this as like reframing, sort of a cognitive reframing of the situation, because both of those people were in a situation, and what they had control over was what they were going to do with their minds that would lead them in a particular direction. They didn't have control over whether or not they were served tea or what the temperature of the tea was. They had control over how they would interpret what they were seeing and how they would react to what they were seeing. So he says that this is a simple example of how the way the guru appears depends on how the disciple looks at the guru. It all depends on the disciple's interpretation. So, and this is true, this insight you find throughout the Buddhist teachings, in the sense that if we have a history with a person, and we kind of anticipate, we label them in a particular way. We label them either as someone who's been very kind to us, someone who's generally very patient, or we label them as someone who seems quite short-tempered, someone who is kind of generally thoughtless. Then on a given day, if either of those people engaged in an action where they maybe spoke to us curtly or showed some lack of consideration, we would be like, "Oh, that seems really out of character for the person that is normally really nice, that we think of as really nice," or maybe they're having a bad day. Or if it was the other person, the person that we've just preemptively labeled as someone who isn't, they're like, "Oh, well, of course they acted that way. That's their nature. They're always like that." That reinforces my keeping my distance from them, my not showing them kindness, or not wanting to be willing to work for their benefit. Even though they both did exactly the same thing, we either have more patience in the mind, more spaciousness in the mind, or less, depending on how we decided to go into that experience with them on that day. And if we had decided to try to go into that, more challenging situation with a more spacious mind, a more open mind, then we would have, if we made, at least if we made effort consistently over a period of time, we really trained in that, then we could expect that that kind of magnanimous response would become more likely, even when there's been difficulty in the past, or we're anticipating some challenging interactions. So this is guru devotion is the same way, in the sense that we are consistently over time trying to cultivate a way of relating to that person, and then going into each interaction can either reinforce that. We can either take that as an opportunity to intentionally reinforce that way of seeing them, or we can be like, aha, they yawned, so they're tired, and if they were a Buddha they wouldn't be tired, so they're not a Buddha. um, you know so if we're always trying to um, harp on what we think of as evidence of them not being a Buddha, then that's what we will reinforce. Whereas if, as we've said before, if we really try to focus on their good qualities, focus on their kindness, and to try to, in line with this example, try to give them the benefit of interpreting things as kindness, um, as a sign of their good qualities, as a sign of their enlightened qualities, even, then then we are using that interaction as a way to deepen our guru devotion. And I think somewhere, in one of these contemplations, I think there's the example, maybe in the one where Lama Zopa is talking about how, we put, we do have to trust uh, our judgment, as to the degree that, because we have to navigate the world with the judgment that we have. So we can't completely discount it, but at the same time, we should try to be humble and realize that we have very far to go, and that, going back to that sort of more ordinary example, when we think of someone who's had a history of maybe being difficult, then every time we see them, we pull back, and we anticipate difficulty. And so, and we don't know manifesting to try to help us overcome our difficulties with practicing patience, with needing to expand our loving kindness, our compassion. Just like the example I was thinking of, that the example of Maitreya, or not who saw the example of the disciple who was doing retreat and was trying to have a vision um, of Maitreya, and who failed over and over again to see a vision, and then purified and purified through all of these retreats, and when when the vision appeared, it was as a dog covered in maggots. Um, but that was a Buddha that was manifesting, but because of the deluded mind of that practitioner, um, or maybe it was Avalokiteshvara, that they were trying to have a vision of an enlightened being, um, and that, because of, initially, only because of their own obscurations, that the enlightened beings have no control over. Like, they can't directly remove our own obscurations. Um, they are what causes us to default to seeing thinking of difficult people as enemies, and to pull back from those are the delusions that are operating in our own mind. And so, kind of the best, after years and years of retreat, the best that this person could do was initially to see this enlightened being as a dog covered in maggots, and then um, but he had developed great love and great compassion through his retreats, and um, tried to relieve the dog of those maggots by using his own tongue, because he also didn't want to crush the maggots. So he thought if he tried to pull them, that some of them would die. So he tried to transfer them using his own tongue, because that was the softest, easiest way to. So he was showing compassion not only for the dog that was suffering, but also for the maggots that were causing the suffering. And then that was when he had the breakthrough of being able to see the enlightened being who was only able previously to manifest in that way. Um, so, of course, we have to rely on the wisdom that we possess, but we can also try to recognize that there's a huge gulf between our level of wisdom and the level of wisdom of a enlightened being. So things don't appear in the way that they exist. Um, we, because we so crave comfort and good reputation and peace of mind and good, then anything that interferes with that instantly becomes aversive to us, even if it's our teacher trying to help us overcome that difficulty by putting us in a challenging situation. We find it incredibly difficult to have that kind of pure view, because we just see things in a more limited way of, this is pleasant and this is unpleasant, and I just want the pleasant, and I just want to be separated from the unpleasant. Um, so we can always try to have that humble view and try to question, is there a way of interpreting this that doesn't, where I can reframe what's happening, and it can support my guru devotion, rather than try to take me away from my guru devotion. Any questions, thoughts, questions? So, yes.
What are some ways that we can try to train ourselves so that response happens more automatically? Because I think to have that spaciousness of mind is very important to cultivate. So, what are some ways that we can?
So the question from the Gompa is, what are some practical ways that we can uh, think of, or more easily think of seeing the Guru as Buddha? And so we'll get to some of those today, some of the historical ways of sort of the scriptural references, and um, some of the things that you find in the material, the teachings, historical material about how to approach that. What has been coming up in the material is trying to notice and single pointedly um, hold the mind in the good qualities that we observe in the teacher. And And so that's, yeah. So for right, I mean, yeah, just so for right now, we kind of have to pair that with some other things, but um, thinking about, just like from that example, like, trying to, even when the guru might criticize something, that they might, I mean, it depends. Again, not all teachers, some teachers don't really have that as their nature, but, historically speaking, I mean, in Tibet, some of the teachers would hit their students with, sticks if they weren't participating or they weren't like listening. So, those were people that had to, that wasn't really that uncommon in the monasteries 100 years ago. You know, I mean, they didn't necessarily beat people, but, it was probably unpleasant to be, kind of hit with a stick. And that persisted, I think, for quite a while. When people would fall asleep, they would nod off, and teacher would come, and the disciplinarian would. Um, so that's a little bit. So those were people that were confronted with, well, this person just hit me. I'm not like, injured, but it wasn't pleasant. Um, and so instead of so to us outwardly that might look like anger or frustration, um, or some kind of short-temperedness, but can we see that as, well, my teacher understands that I need to achieve enlightenment, and this one lifetime is my very best opportunity, and they don't want me to waste, they don't want me to develop bad habits, they don't want me to, learn how to meditate incorrectly and then have to kind of relearn that later. They want me to have really good skills and sort of hygiene with respect to how I approach meditation from day one. Um, and so they're actually willing to like risk, me reacting negatively, which is how I would normally react, in order to try to help me progress, as rapidly as possible. Now, of course, the teachers, they need to be skillful about, not all students can necessarily handle that, but so they have to maybe tailor things, but to be appropriate to the individual needs of the student. Um, but kind of just in terms of this part of it, I would say what we're trying to do, and this is the same skill that we really try to apply in general, which is to question our reaction. Like, this happened, and then what did I in the moment, how did I interpret it? Like maybe as a daily practice, like at the end of the day, if you're trying to train in guru devotion, or you're trying to train in loving kindness, or whatever it might be, you might do the same sort of thing where you recognize that, okay, right now this is a training, and I'm somewhere kind of in the very beginning of my ability to master this training, and that's fine. But in order for me to make progress day by day, what I need to do is pay attention in every interaction, in this case with one's teacher, and notice, did I interpret this in not the best way? Did I react in not the best way? And then why? Like, what is that? Because, um, I can't see this as the actions of of an enlightened being, or is there a way that I can, but I didn't really think about it at the time? And can I kind of think through it just later? And then, because you're still then familiarizing your mind, even if it's later that day, that night, the next day, you're just going back and you're like, okay, well, at the time, I maybe didn't do it so well, but now can I think through it and reach a different conclusion about that reaction that I had? Um, so, in a way, it's kind of similar to purification practice. You're kind of using your experiences as a way of correcting what happened. And then ideally, just like with anger or jealousy or, any of the ways of relating that aren't so constructive, ideally by taking it seriously and trying, to reframe things whenever it is that we can engage in it, ideally we'll be able to do that closer and closer to the interaction, to the moment that we're actually in that with that person. And then it'll become more stable. So that's, I think, part of it in terms of what we've covered. Oh, it was Maitreya. Yeah, it was yeah. In that story, the practitioner was in the next day. And I was like, oh, was it Maitreya? Was it Avalokiteshvara? I couldn't remember, but it's Maitreya. It's in day 41. Any other questions? Okay, so in day 42, we have one of these new kind of logical proofs that we can use to think about Lama Zopa in day 42 is talking about compassion and talking about the seed of compassion that we do possess, that we have compassion for our family, our friends, and the job is really just to expand that seed that we already. It's not that we have to do something completely foreign, but that we do have a seed of compassion that we have to grow and nurture into universal compassion. And then he points out that because the mind, that when a person has any compassion, they find it easy to work for the benefit of the being for whom they have compassion. And in our own experience, we've seen, in whatever limited experience we've had, we've seen in our own direct experience that in meditation, at least, for moments at least, we can grow that feeling. We can have at least moments where we feel that willingness in relation to one or more sentient beings that normally or previously we didn't really feel that for. And it was a genuine experience. It wasn't incredibly long lasting, incredibly stable. It certainly wasn't for all sentient beings without exception, in every moment. but we had some experience of, you know, before I heard or tried any of this sort of training, this was my experience. And now when I do try, there's some progress. There's some um, at least momentary, you know, fleeting, and I don't know. Maybe you guys are bodhisattvas, and so. But generally, you know, we can say that we have had some moments of progress, which means that it's not some sort of difference in kind. It's just a difference in effort and time, because if we've gotten from here to there with this much effort, then we can expect that we'll get from there to there with that much more effort. And so the understanding that there have been beings in the past who have really put in a great deal of effort over a long period of time and achieved the perfection of all of these positive states, that becomes kind of logically inescapable, um, because there's no impedance to that. We we can see examples, um, of also in the world of people who seem to have done that. People like His Holiness, people like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, um, other teachers that, other lineages that, you might, Thich Nhat Hanh, other great masters. And so we can see that the mind, unlike the body, we've also seen examples of like great athletes and so on, but it's a pretty narrow range that we've seen. There's not like one person who's, they're all kind of separated by a few hundredths of a second at elite levels, or kind of pretty minute differences once you get to the highest. And so we can be like, well, the body certainly can only be trainable to a certain point, but the mind is inherently different. The mind has no such impedance to that kind of training. So we can then kind of logically theorize that enlightened beings exist, and because they've perfected love and compassion and wisdom and generosity, then the kinds of actions that naturally that we know, again, from our own direct experience, flow from those states of mind are the kinds of actions that they would engage in. They would be trying to act out their perfected compassion, their perfected love. They're just like when we see people, just ordinary people who have great compassion for the homeless or great compassion for animals. They really devote themselves to those causes. They go without sleep, they go without, they inconvenience themselves, to act out that drive that they've become familiar with, and that's, a tiny fraction of what we're talking about here. So we can conclude that with confidence, that this training results in that, and that therefore these beings are actively engaging in that. And if that's true, then how else, what better way would they be manifesting those qualities other than appearing in the world as fully qualified teachers? What now, of course, there are other ways that they would be manifesting as well, but wouldn't that be one of the most effective, most beneficial, quickest, most direct ways of accomplishing the result of the training that they've gone through. Um, he says, on the basis of certain faith in this, we can then consider our gurus. The subject of guru devotion will then have taste and meaning. So we try to think about the perfection of the mind as something that we can demonstrate is logically permissible within the world, and then think, well, those beings who've done it, they must be manifesting as fully qualified teachers, because that is the best way to, just like the people who really care about the homeless, they're not they're not going out in the world and making that situation worse. They're finding, they're the ones who are working to end homelessness. They're the ones, it's just the logical relationship between what they deeply care about and what they're doing to accomplish that goal. So we can think that the people who've perfected love and generosity and patience are devoting themselves to ending suffering for all of us. And of all of there's many ways in which they might do that, but certainly they're not overlooking manifesting as teachers, manifesting as fully qualified gurus. So the fully qualified gurus that exist are expressions of that kind of perfected mind. He says, every single word of our guru's teaching is guiding us to enlightenment. If our gurus are not those numberless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas working for us, there is no one else to point out as the ones guiding us to enlightenment. Therefore, our gurus are Buddhas. Any questions, thoughts?
Venerable Dondrub, I just
Yeah.
have a comment, and I think it was Byron Katie. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's a teacher. She's not a Buddhist teacher, and I think that she taught this, that you see what you look for. So if you are looking for kindness, that's what you're going to see. And that's in people, that's in situations, that's in events. It's again, it's what you look for is what you're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that pertains to the guru as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we can, because I mean, all of this isn't dependent on, this training is applicable to every student. And it's something, we don't have to wait until, there is a specific guru. And, of course, when there is, then we're meant to apply it to that specific guru. But, these are things that we can train in and try to make stable, even in the absence of a particular guru. And then we do go into it with that training already, somewhat stabilized in the mind. And so we're able to, like Lama Zopa is saying, it's not coming from the side of the guru, it's coming from our own mind. It's our own pure view. It's our own pure appearance that we are bringing to this situation. So in a way, I mean, of course, we've talked about how we want to select a guru from the pool of people who are fully qualified teachers as best we can, but that not every fully qualified teacher is suitable to be our guru. But we can try to think, well, if like what if His Holiness was, what, even though I can't really talk to him, like what can I still think about? Is it easy for me? Is he a suitable guru for me, to take? Um, and then we can train in it, just having that as an example. And then if we do meet a different, a Geshe or a Rinpoche or someone, that we do have a more personal relationship with, then we've got that training already in the mind and it just transfers over. It's not like it's because they bring something specific or new or unique to that new situation. It's just that we've made that stable and now we're applying it to this situation. And of course, we may have more than one teacher, so we train in it even with that person, and then 10 years later, 20 years later, um, it transfers to the next person because we're going into it with a stable way of thinking about it. So to answer, this is kind of one of those scriptural things I was saying, that we kind of join this with, and this goes along with the next one. Um, the next, I guess, the next two days, 43 and 44, are also just kind of further explaining. Um, Lama Zopa says, during our beginningless lifetimes until now, all the virtuous teachers we have met, those who gave us ordination, initiation, teachings, are one being, the absolute Guru, who has had various names and forms. When we see the sun or moon rising, billions of reflections spontaneously arise in all the bodies of water on the earth, in oceans, rivers, ponds, and even dewdrops. Like this, effortlessly, spontaneously, Buddhas work for sentient beings by revealing various means that suit them. All of our teachers are the Dharmakaya, the absolute Guru, where all the Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha come. And then he talks about how, going back into the idea of the three bodies of the Buddha, like Shakyamuni Buddha, when he manifested in the as a wheel turning Buddha, I think that's a supreme Nirmanakaya aspect. But any enlightened being, they have the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya aspect, and it's due to our being limited, our, again, going back to the things that were said about our mind being obscured and how we can't fully trust our judgments about things. We also can only experience the world of human sensory, we reality, and that's on us. We haven't, there are beings who've trained their minds to receive teachings from the Sambhogakaya aspect of enlightened beings, but we haven't. And so in order to reach us, the Dharmakaya mind has to manifest in Nirmanakaya aspect. And that's because that's the only way that we can interact with that mind, with our current level of development and our current abilities. He says, without these gurus in ordinary aspect, there is no way that we can receive the blessings of the Buddhas. There's no way that we can receive the Buddha's actions of teaching and so forth. All the Buddhas can guide us only through our gurus. Therefore, even though there are numberless Buddhas, without the ordinary forms of our gurus' holy bodies, we would be lost. So this is another way of thinking about how we've been led, not just in this life but in all of our previous lives, up that we just don't remember, all of the training and all of the vows and all of the things that the Buddhas have done to try to ripen our minds to get us to this point, in the hopes that we can, that lifetime after lifetime, that we'll continue. And even when we've fallen off and gone back to the lower realms, and then they've manifested in the lower realms, and um, you know so we have to realize that it isn't that the Buddhas don't want to, like, fly down from the heavens and put on some sort of grand magical display, but we don't have the karma to have that sort of experience. That's not the kind of thing. Just like with with Maitreya and the dog, and it's our own obscurations that prevent that kind of pure view. There's many examples. I think, remember, I think it was Venerable Pema in the Discovering Buddhism last week, who was talking about how Lama Tsongkhapa, uh, and that's just one example, but throughout history, many examples of highly realized beings um, being able to take teachings from even statues, and because the mind of the enlightened beings pervade all of space and time, and by their pure view, they were able to kind of coalesce in a way, that Dharmakaya mind, and be able to interact. Um, but we can't do that, and that's again, that's on us. Like the Buddhas are like, like with the dog, he was saying, I've been here the whole time. This is, but you just didn't have the karma. You didn't shift the karma, and now the karma is shifted due to your own training, and now things are different. Um, and then day 44 is again going back to some of these scriptural citations, where if we cultivate the view of Shakyamuni Buddha as an unmistaken guide and a non-deceptive, fully qualified guide, then in the sutras and so on, um, he said, in degenerate times in the future, I will manifest in the form of spiritual masters and abbots in order to ripen the minds of sentient beings. I will also show birth, old age, sickness, and death. Don't worry that you will not meet me in the degenerate times. At that time, I shall manifest as the abbot or as the teacher. So, again, we can use the confidence that we have developed in Shakyamuni Buddha, in the founder of the path that we're following, and using his own words, using his own statements about how he will manifest, and think that, again, he's just one example of all of the countless, numberless sentient beings who have done what he's done, achieved enlightenment, and then are manifesting in the world for the benefit of sentient beings, and doing so principally in the form of teachers who are showing the unmistaken path to put an end to suffering completely. Any thoughts, questions? Mm-hmm.
What you just said, is that this connection to the metaphor of the sun and the moon reflecting on, the water surfaces.
Mhm. Yeah. So the question from the Gompa was about that the previous metaphor about how the Buddhas are like the sun or like the moon. Usually, moon and sun, like sun is connected sort of like with the metaphor of wisdom, and moon is connected with the metaphor of bodhicitta, because wisdom is sort of illuminating, and bodhicitta has this sort of cooling, calm. Kind of energy connected with it. So when you see sun and moon, like that's kind of how they are used. Um, um, but the example specifically was that that the sun and the moon, they don't, just like the Buddhas, their nature is to radiate, either because they're reflecting or they're, but their nature is illumination. Their nature, and that's just their inherent nature. That's just what the sun does. That's what the moon does. It broadcasts kind of light into the world. And the Buddhas are the same in that they um, naturally, spontaneously, they don't have to think about it. They don't have to, because they've perfected the training, their only wish, their only action is to bring benefit to sentient beings. And then the vehicle that they are only able to do that in is the Nirmanakaya aspect of ordinary gurus, ordinary teachers, fully qualified, but um, you know, teachers in ordinary aspect, teachers without crazy mystical powers, and just sort of that they just sort of look like um, ordinary aspect, um, because that is just how it's like the sun has no choice but to shine on the world as a whole. But it's kind of like those sun rays, they need, in order to warm, like they have to not be prevented, they have to not be blocked. So in order to do the job of manifesting, they have to appear as ordinary people. There's no other, they just don't have another vehicle. Of course, they do, like the Sambhogakaya aspect, that is another vehicle, but for us at this time, we can't, our mind can't take teachings from the Sambhogakaya aspect. There is simultaneously, there are simultaneously Sambhogakaya aspects and Dharmakaya aspects of enlightened mind. They're all operating at the same time, but because there's such a tiny slice of reality that we have access to, they are appearing in ordinary Nirmanakaya aspect to reach that tiny slice of reality. And then for the other highly realized beings that that can send their mind into the pure realms in the Sambhogakaya, or can have conversations, kind of meditative conversations, then with Sambhogakaya aspect, then they, of course, they're doing that too. But that's up to us. We have to cultivate that capacity. And once we do, then that becomes open to us. And if we don't, then it's not. But we won't unless we get reached where we are in the beginning and then guided to that level, which is what enlightened mind is doing. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, well, then we can leave it there for today. And we can dedicate. So we can think about our altruistic intention and think that by listening and participating, we've actualized that intention and the positive energy that that has created will ripen in a beneficial way. So we want to direct that into ripening in the most beneficial ways that we can think of. So we want to envision that that positive energy is sealed, dedicated, directed at ending suffering in all of its forms for all sentient beings without exception, and manifesting as happiness and the causes of happiness in all of its forms, temporary and ultimate, for all sentient beings without exception. So try to think along those lines and visualizing the ripening of that positive energy as clearly as you can in those expansive ways. All right. Well, thanks for coming, and see everybody on Thursday.
Thank